So we are so excited. This is the start of a whole new podcast. My friend Stanford and I, we covered Studio Ghibli Fest last year, and we thought we're having so much fun. We got to keep it going, and everybody always wants more Disney, more Disney, more Disney, more Disney. So how can we cover Disney in a new, exciting way? So let's podcast about it. And we decided instead of chronological order, we're just going to do it random order. And so the first one that we picked is Cinderella. And Stanford is here to talk about Cinderella.
Hi, how's it going? Thanks for having me here, Rachel.
Yeah, I'm so excited. Cinderella is one of the first sets of reviews that I did on my channel. I love Cinderella. And,
oh, really? Oh, cool.
Yeah,
okay.
When I first started my channel way back, I think in 2013, I did reviews of The Slipper and the Rose, The Glass Slipper, this animated film, and Ever After. So I started with those four.
All these great filmed adaptations of this classic fairy tale.
So good. And then, of course, I added, when the new one came out, I added that.
Yes.
And I've also reviewed Cinderella 2 and Cinderella 3. Plus, I have my Disney canon.
Somewhere.
Yeah.
They even watch those.
Cinderella 3 is watchable. It's okay. At least they tried. There's some decent animation. They tried to have a good story. Cinderella 2 is an abomination and should never be discussed. But
yeah. I've never seen either one. I refuse.
I would say that of the cheapquels, Cinderella 3 is in the top 5.
Oh, good. Okay.
It's one of the better ones, yeah. But still, it's obviously nothing like this.
It's a cheapquel.
So I'm really excited to talk about this. This film came out in 1950, and we're gonna have a lot of fun talking about it. It was their 12th animated feature film, and I think a lot of people think that Disney has more princess films than they really do, but up until Little Mermaid, there were only 3.
Exactly. And this being the second one, and I agree with you. It's really interesting if people really think about it.
Yeah.
It's these latter day ones that are more princess oriented, it seems like.
Yeah. Because
we got a lot more.
Yeah. Because in the 90s we had, in the 90s, in the Renaissance, we had 4 or 5. So I think maybe that's what gives them that impression. But, so one thing I think is really fascinating about Cinderella is that the story has been around for forever. I mean, it goes way back, and you can find sort of Cinderella stories and versions of the story in tons of different cultures, and there's so many different film. It seems like every 4 or 5 years there's a new Cinderella that's came out. Yes. And I'm just curious for you, before we kind of dive into this particular film, what do you think makes the story of Cinderella so timeless?
That's a really good question, and I've been thinking about that too. As preparing for this, I think the concept of being downtrodden yet still having faith, and then getting rewarded for that. There's something just so satisfying in this challenge, coming through my hard trial, but there's a happy ending. It's again, the light at the end of the tunnel sort of thing. So I think that's a real timeless thing. Of course, I think there's a romantic aspect to it as well, because she gets her prince in the end, right? She gets her man in the end, and what a happy thing too, that a man and woman come together in such a happy way. So I think it's that combo, but what's your take on it, right?
Yeah, I have a similar take. I think it's a story about hope, and that no matter how bad things get, no matter how things that there's hope. There's that somebody will come and rescue you. Somebody will be there for you to help you. That'll pay off being a good person, being a kind person. Mm-hmm. And I think we all like to kind of, at certain points, especially in our lives, think of us as being the persecuted one and being the one who's
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so
Absolutely.
the idea of the fairy godmother is very, very sort of attractive and hopeful. And I think that it annoys me when I hear people that talk about it as an anti-feminist story because, the prince comes and rescues her. I'm like, no, he doesn't.
No,
he doesn't.
It's the fairy godmother.
Yeah. And it depends on the version of the story, but most of the versions, like, it's just, that's not what the real, like, rescue is. The rescue is like her like, it's not like she's doing it to meet the prince and to fall in love and to, like, that's kind of the what just happens to happen,
Yeah. Right. It's not like she's pining for the prince. You know? Yeah.
And I especially love in The Slipper and the Rose when because in that one, like, she actually has to decide to come back to the prince because he's going to marry this other woman. He obviously doesn't want to, but he thinks she's gone. She decides to come back, and they don't have the trying on the slipper in that one. And so it's even more sort of her choice. It's not I'm going to rescue you. And it's the same way in Ever After, where she says, you've come to rescue me. It's like, I already rescued myself. Thank you. Two isn't technically a Cinderella story. It's just happened to have the character, so it doesn't count. But as far as, like, just the actual traditional story, it's really hard to screw up for me. I just love it.
Well, that's great to hear, and that all these other adaptations that hopefully you've enjoyed too, right? It's in one form or another.
Yeah,
even though they might not all be created equally, but I think all those are pretty decent films in their own regard, aren't they?
Yeah, I even like the Roger Hammerstein Cinderella. I mean, I just love Cinderella.
Yeah, that's a great one. Yeah.
So
I think that Cinderella, it's really interesting too. In the context of the history of the Disney studio, Cinderella is a very appropriate story.
Yeah,
I think, for what was going on at the studio, because here they were, World War II had ended, and the studio was in a lot of debt and financial trouble. And Cinderella, Walt had the wisdom and the tenacity to go with a fairy tale that they knew that they could deliver. Mm-hmm. And did they ever? And it basically saved the studio and really propelled it to the next level. And I just think that's so cool that Cinderella helped them Disney transform too, mm-hmm. into to really, I think it's peak period, in kind of the mid 50s to Walt Disney's death.
Is that your favorite time period, the silver era?
No, I think it's hard to pick a favorite because there's so much I love, but definitely I think that the output in that period is just so remarkable because you look at the films, you look at Disneyland Park, mm-hmm. and I just think it's pretty remarkable what they what they were able to accomplish artistically and commercially.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, it's certainly one of my favorites for sure. And they had such a variety during that era, and it all started off with Cinderella.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think it's just an easy movie to sort of dismiss as, I don't know, as light, silly, fluffy. But I think it actually has some of the most emotional moments in all of Disney. I think it has some of the biggest heart in all of Disney. I guess they had basically Cinderella, Peter Pan, and Alice in Wonderland kind of that were in process. And so they were kind of debating about which one to do. And they had Mary Blair concept art for all three. And they decided that I think there's this quote that, like, basically Walt was like, okay, we need to be sensible. We need to make the most commercially successful one or whatever. And so they went with Cinderella as the one.
I found this interesting quote. I was doing some research on this, Rachel, and Mindy Johnson, who's a Disney historian, who's written and contributed to a lot of different books and publications, was talking about this very thing. And I'll just quote her. She says it best: "No longer the brash upstarts of the Snow White days. Walt Disney's stable of top talent was now full of seasoned storytellers, and it was in their own best interest to secure their futures as well." And so Walt knew that working on a feature film like this again offered a chance for the artists to collectively envision the story. And then, if done right, they knew they could save the business and ensure the future of animation, which we already talked about. But I thought that was such an interesting concept that here's this team. I mean, they created Snow White, in the 30s, and now they've even got more experience, and they've been through a lot. They've been through some seriously difficult trials, and Walt knew that this was something that they could really do and deliver on. Sounds like Roy wasn't completely sure. I think Roy was scared just about the finances. Clearly.
I get the feeling that he was always kind of scared.
I think you're out. That was his job, right?
Yeah. He was always like, calm down.
Yeah. Walt was the visionary. And Roy was the practical guy.
Because there were some people that thought that he should just close down animation. I mean, this happened multiple times through Walt's career. And that because I think the live action was doing pretty well during that time period. And so there was some, pressure to just stop, because the animation took so long back then, and it was such an investment. Expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, when we think now, like, I think Beauty and the Beast, it was like 2 years from start to finish. And now it's like, just depends on the project, I guess. But like, it's possible to finish an animated film very quickly now. Whereas back then, there's no way you couldn't do it. And so you'd be investing years of people's work and labor and expenses and everything. And they had not done a fairy tale since Snow White.
Right. And they hadn't done a full-length animated feature devoted to one storyline since Bambi in 1942.
Yeah, it's a long time.
Yeah.
It's a long time. So yeah, it was definitely a really interesting thing. And to me, it's interesting because after Sleeping Beauty was to be a big failure, they would not do another princess movie until Little Mermaid in 1989. And they had this idea that girls' movies didn't sell, that they weren't, and which is really funny to me because, I mean, you just think Snow White, Cinderella, like, hello, they kind of saved your company.
The movies that made the studio. Yeah. Sleeping Beauty. Yeah.
The first film that all the 9 old men worked on, which is kind of fun. It's directing animators. You want to explain who the 9 old men are?
Well, yes. So the 9 old men were named by Walt Disney, kind of tongue-in-cheek, after the 9 justices of the U.S. Supreme Court, right? I mean, as far as just a body of people. Mm-hmm. But they were the 9 animators who were just really the top animators at the Walt Disney Studios. Yeah. Again, under the kind of the direction and management of Walt Disney himself. And, even after Walt Disney's death, many of them continued to work at the studio through their retirement.
Yeah, and most of them did. Wolfgang Reitman is one of the most famous. He directed a bunch. Yeah. So the 9 old men, you had Lee Clark, Mark Davis, Ole Johnston, Mitt Call, Ward Kimball, Eric Larson, John Lounsbury, Wolfgang Reiterman, Frank Thomas. Those are And so that was the 9 old men, and they weren't old, but they were old in the sense of wisdom when he
and so good at their craft, and I love. I wonder how they felt about Walt referring to them as that. I can only imagine what some of those discussions that they had must have been like in the the sweatbox for the screen, on the screening in the animation building with Walt, and as they were discussing their work and their peers' work.
I think that you were happy because whenever I think whenever Walt if he gave you some kind of like, not that he was a mean man, he was not. He was just the boss. He was the boss, and so if he paid you a compliment like that, then it was probably pretty exciting.
Oh, seriously,
so,
yeah, or incredibly intimidating.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. Oh, what's his name? Do you know the African American animator? Floyd Norman? Yeah,
Floyd Norman. Yeah.
So I saw Floyd Norman at Comic-Con, and he was amazing. And
he's a remarkable man. Yeah.
So great. And he had just stories about, because the whole lecture was all about the 9 Old Men. So he had stories about each one of them, and
because he had worked with each one of them.
Yeah, it was really cool. It was really cool.
It's cool, and it's so wonderful. I mean, he's a treasure because he's just one of the few people alive still who worked with Walt Disney and all of these, the 9 Old Men and all of these other animators and business folks at Disney. And he's really.
And he was very quick to defend Walt. And that he had a love for Walt, and said that he felt like Walt encouraged diversity in ways that other studios weren't, and that because you hear these people say, oh well, he was this anti-Semitic or whatever, and the PBS crew, when they did their documentary, they tried. I read this whole article where they said they tried to find proof of all this stuff, and they're like, and you figured that they would want something kind of juicy for their documentary. So if it was there, they would, have it. So it's total bogus.
It's bogus. I'm so glad you brought up Floyd, because I had just a kind of a fluke of a privilege to interview him.
Oh, no way.
For when he was doing press for the re-release of the Jungle Book.
Oh.
Not too long ago. I can't remember when the Jungle Book came out again. When they did a digital and Blu-ray release of it. And he could not have been, more gracious. I mean, here he is doing interviews with all these strangers, and then just some, random dude from Utah who he's talking to. But he was so nice. But as you say, he was so direct and so clear about what it was like working with Walt Disney. And I didn't bring up anything about racism or anything, but he did, and he just wanted it and to be clear that Walt was a tough boss, but he was a good man, and that was and I think a tough boss in the way that he was really trying to bring the best out of the best work out of people, and the proof's in the pudding with all these movies,
And I just admire Walt so much in the sense that he was always pushing things forward. I mean, I really feel like he would be pretty disgusted with these remakes. Not that we want to get into it too much, but just like he was all about just continually pushing things
something
forward.
New. Yeah.
And he never did a sequel his entire career. And maybe with live action there were some, but as far as the animation, that's just really impressive, because that would have been very tempting and easy to sell to the backers and to everything like that. We're going to do Snow White 2, we're going to do whatever. And
Cinderella 2. I'm kidding.
Cinderella 2, yeah. And so anyway, it's really interesting to talk about and you had this amazing team of animators at this time. Like you had the 9 Old Men, of course, but also people like Mary Blair. And if people listening don't know about Mary Blair, she was an amazing artist. And there's multiple books just with her artwork, and her concept artwork is so beautiful.
Yeah.
Cinderella, for It's a Small World, she was heavily involved with that. For Peter Pan, and there's another one. Alice in Wonderland, of course. Yeah, Alice in Wonderland is probably the most influenced by Mary Blair's art. The way she used the way that Alice in Wonderland uses geometric shapes, like the dress of the Queen of Hearts is actually hearts, and it uses triangles and things, is really amazing, and that was very influenced by her. And
by Mary Blair's wonderful work. Yeah.
What do you love about Mary Blair's art?
so much, Rachel. So I've got a couple interesting quotes about her that I found. Animator Mark Davis, who's one of the 9 old men, and Mark Davis, now he was a wonderful animator. He was just a wonderful artist and designer, and he worked on a lot of Disney theme park attractions after, too. But what he said about Mary Blair is that in Mary's hands, colors worked like never before. And I think that's true. I mean, when you look at things, Mindy Johnson, who again wrote this essay on Cinderella, was saying that that her vibrant palette and sense of staging defined each setting, creating stunning visual imaginings while bringing the narrative completely into the fairy tale as Disney originally intended. People just can't compliment her enough. I think and you look at her pictures, the genesis of Mary Blair, how that layout worked, or different colors that they chose to use, or a different design that they chose to use, and you can really tell that in Cinderella.
Mm-hmm. And you can especially tell it in Cinderella in the backdrops. The backdrops are so beautiful. And that's what
incredible. Yeah.
That's what separates Disney from anybody else, is that they would have just layers of backdrops, and so it just looked so lush and so beautiful, and that it wasn't just you'd easily just have like a blue background, but they pushed it further, and scenes like at the palace, scenes of the kingdom, certainly when the different transformations, you're just beautiful. It's just so pretty.
And even different things too, which I've wondered, and I think that there probably are some references in some of the art that's been published, but even like the wallpaper of the house that Cinderella is living in, her father's house, I think was definitely influenced by Mary Blair. Mm-hmm. And just these amazing details that I think so often could be left out in something, and the Disney animation team put them in.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about the film. Of course, it starts out with Cinderella. It has a little introduction, which I is also very influenced by the introduction by Mary Blair's art.
Love that. Yes, the title cards I think are Mary Blair's art.
Yeah,
and then that wonderful introduction, which is just the storybook opens up, and it's just
so
the best.
Classic.
Yeah.
So classic, and I love when you see Lady Tremaine and the girls through the window.
I do too.
And it's so good.
Yeah.
And so a couple of the really strong things kind of out of the gate. I love Eileen Woods as Cinderella.
Wasn't she the greatest choice?
Definitely one of the strongest of the Disney princesses vocalists. Her voice is so beautiful, and it's so warm and comforting.
Yeah, she's got a remarkably beautiful voice, particularly for this role. And it's so great that she's both the speaking voice and the singing voice, which was typically done too during these films. And I agree with you. She's just fantastic.
Yeah, and so Lady Tremaine Lady Tremaine, of course, was Eleanor Audley, and she is a very, very important voice actress for Disney. She did
for Disney.
Yeah, she did this, and she did Maleficent.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting too. Again, in the same essay by Mindy Johnson, in pulling out some sound quotes from Eleanor Audley, Eleanor was saying that she believes that Lady Tremaine Cinderella was her best work. And,
oh, really? Interesting.
And I thought that was interesting. And I mean, you'd wonder if she'd go with Maleficent, right, or something else. But Lady Tremaine really is such a deliciously bad character, and she just voices her so well. And there was also some quotes in there from some of the animators saying that because of her outstanding voice work, that really helped them how they,
made the
with all the characters, but how they made her character.
Yeah, I just love the way that her whole mission in life is to just control one person. is it in the way. I mean, she has a cat named Lucifer. You can't get any more like evil than that. But it's,
it's such an evil cat.
And
great villain.
You know, I don't know. She's just very like, she's not a big shouting kind of a villain, but more of the like, it's almost worse. The villain that's just going to make your life miserable, but not. Yeah. You almost wish that she would just shout and scream. Like the worst that I feel like is when she says "girls," girls.
Yeah,
that kind of is about as loud as she gets, which kind of makes her scarier.
Right. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think one of the most terrifying scenes with her is near the first, where she, the Lucifer traps Gus in the cup.
Oh yeah.
And the cup ends up in one of the sisters' rooms.
We have time to play practical jokes, do we?
Yeah, and it just that reveal. Cinderella walks into that dark bedroom, and she's in that giant bed, and just in the shadows, petting that horrible Lucifer, and just think, this is one scary, woman.
The
and it's just so beautiful. Yeah,
and the draperies. I just did them. Do them again. Okay. So good. Yeah.
Oh, she's good. She's so evil.
And I think that it's a mistake to pin Cinderella down as a weak character, because she is somebody who it's easy to kind of maybe think of her that way, because she's not like a Belle who's like, big and bold. Like she doesn't have an I Want song. She has an I Dreamed kind of song. But she's somebody who is just unrelentingly positive in the face of horrible things. And I think that could be cloying, but they pay off. And we'll talk about it more, but they pay off in the moment when she needs to lose it, and so to me, she's actually a really strong character, because it takes a certain degree of strength to be positive amongst all that adversity.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's really easy to, like, I read this one article once where they were claiming that Aurora and Cinderella and Ariel were bad role models. Ooh, that got me heated. I gave them a very strong response.
Don't be messing.
No.
What kind of response did you have?
There's strength in softness, and there's strength in positivity. I don't think that everything needs to be like some big, bold response. But the thing that I think special about Cinderella is that everybody loved her. Everybody was so loyal to her, aside from Lady Tremaine. Everybody in her life wanted to help her, and everybody in her life loved her. And that, I think, says what a special person you are. And yeah, they might be mice and birds and stuff, but they're the characters in this movie, and they love her and they want to help her so much. I think that says a lot.
They're loyal to her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't think of her as a weak character at all, and I don't think either of those others are weak characters or bad role models. And it's all about how you use it to teach lessons. I think any Disney movie you can watch with your kids, and there's a lesson to be learned. I really do. I think even the not so good ones, I still think there's a lesson there. Yeah. And so anyway, all right. So of course we have the mice in the mice and the birds.
The birds.
And the birds.
Yeah, in particular. Yeah.
And did you watch that video I sent you?
Yes, it was fascinating.
Interesting, huh?
I'm so glad you said it. So Rachel sent me this video that has the soundtrack both pitched for as it is in the production, in the finished product with the mice, and then the original track that just with the regular human voice before, they had been altered. And I thought it was fascinating. Did you have a preference? I mean,
I definitely prefer the squeaky.
I do too.
Definitely.
There's something that's just so satisfying to me about how they did that, and they speak, I guess, some kind of a pidgin English, but it's so charming. It works.
They're
really
mice.
work.
They should have
In my
squeaky
mind.
voices. It feels weird for them to not have squeaky voices. At least in this, maybe in like the Rescuers, you can get away with not having squeaky voices, but for this kind of story, it just, I don't know, it feels so weird. Maybe it's just because I'm used to it the one way, but I don't know.
No, the mice are such a great addition. Again, because they're we're talking about they're so loyal to her. They're her family. They're her.
Yeah. Do you think that there's too much of them? Do you think that's a flaw in the film?
Well,
too much mice Lucifer shenanigans.
I have to tell you, I don't, because I think one of the joys of the film is how that story is mapped out. Because again, sure, some of that stuff is not necessarily critical to the plot, or they really stretch. One of those scenes is really stretched out for gags or for some kind of dramatic effect. But I've always loved it, and again, I was really trying to pay close attention to every scene when I was rewatching it, for this, just to see if if there'd be something that I was critical about. And no, personally, it really works for me. And maybe it's a combination again of being sentimental about it, but it's a type of storytelling that I just think really, really works. It was interesting to learn too from this Mindy Johnson article that I read that Walt Disney was involved. He went to every story meeting for Cinderella, and I think they were just trying to iron out these extra characters and different things too were really important. They wanted to make sure that the mice worked, that Bruno the dog and the horse worked as being part of her team, that they didn't take over and they weren't getting in the way, but that they'd be sympathetic and that you'd be rooting for them. I don't know. And I think too that another reason why I like your age is, for me, the gags work. I think they're funny. Like, I always love that scene where Jack and Gus are trying to get that necklace, the bead, and then it breaks, and they're like putting them on their tails and in the hat and all this stuff, and Lucifer's going. I mean, I love it. I think it's great. What's your take on it? Sorry, that's a very long answer.
No, I agree. I enjoy it. I think they're fun. I guess I can see, if you're not like as into animation as we are, that maybe they're a little indulgent, but I like it. I like it.
I think it works. And also, it's a film of its time, even though I think it's timeless, but also you can see, this film was made late 40s, early 50s, when that was part of the style, part of the storytelling used in animation. Because some of those segments even feel like that they're a short. That they could, it's like these little composed scenes where there's just all this mayhem going on, and that it's just funny.
Yeah, I just enjoy it. Yeah. I don't need everything to all be leading to a plot, like it doesn't all have to be some kind of puzzle that all fits in perfectly to the plot. And so it's interesting, the music in this movie, because it feels so much like a Sherman Brothers type of music. Of course, they hadn't met Sherman Brothers yet at this point, but it was songs. It was written by 3 people: Mac David, Jerry Livingston, Al Hoffman wrote the songs. And there's Cinderella, A Dream Is a Wish Your Heart Makes, Sing Sweet Nightingale, The Work Song, Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo, and So This Is Love. So 7 songs. And, of course, the first, real song, Cinderella, I guess, but the first big song we get is A Dream Is a Wish Your Heart Makes. And...
hello. Does it get any better than that? I don't think so. Not for a Disney flick. It's so good.
It's so good. It's one of my favorites. It'd probably be in my top 10 for sure of my favorite Disney songs.
For sure. Mine too. I guess such hopeful lyrics. Again, it's just a beautiful song. Mm-hmm. Beautifully sung by Eileen Woods.
Beautifully sung, yeah.
And just again, perfectly animated and just wonderful. Yeah.
So then get the working song.
I love the working song. It's so much fun. That's just, again, I think that's just part of I remember, as a kid watching this movie and just thinking, this is so cool that these animals are, they know how to sew. They know how to, create that lift, out with a shoe that's got all the supplies in it or whatever that helps them get to the top of the mannequin and
go around in circles till he's really, really dizzy.
It's such clever rhymes and
it's really fun.
The squeaky mouse singing, which is perfect.
Yeah, it's way better than the regular people singing for sure.
Yes, I agree.
And then we do get the Sing Sweet Nightingale sequence, which is, I think, one of the most beautiful sequences in the movie.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
She's and shows how just positive she is. She's so positive. And she's cleaning the floor and the bubbles, and I love the animation on the bubbles.
Yeah.
You see her reflection in the bubbles, and it's beautiful.
It's beautiful. And again, the colors in that scene too, because again, I think that's very Mary Blair, kind of that those black and magenta in different ways that they were representing the bubbles and the reflections. It's I mean, the animation it's remarkable. I mean, who knows how many bubbles they had to animate? A bunch. And not to mention all the different versions of Cinderella, in the bubbles too. And then
it's another one. Yeah, it's another one that's totally unnecessary for the story, but I like these Disney movies that let you just kind of live with the characters a little bit, just kind of get to be their friends. Fun.
Yeah. No, I agree.
We don't have that as much now in modern animation, everything, even something as great as Coco was, it's all very plot focused. It's all very kind of part of the web to get you to the end. There's not sort of these little asides that are just sort of fun as much.
I think today's audiences would probably complain about pacing.
Yeah.
If some stuff,
probably.
If some additional stuff like that was put in because it's boring.
Yeah.
No, it's beautiful and you should enjoy it as you said so well, just this extra moment you get to be with this really great character.
Yeah. I mean, the only one modern one I can even think of that had some of that might be like A Princess and the Frog. Kind of had some sequences like that where you're
I think it used it was kind of influenced by Cinderella.
Mm-hmm. So basically, the mice, of course we all know the story. The mice make the dress and she sees the dress and it's so beautiful and it's her mother's dress. And here's where we get the emotional payoff for that makes the character more than just a happy-go-lucky perfect kind of character is this. I honestly think this scene when they tear apart her dress and she is just devastated and has I think it's the most devastating scene in all of Disney. Maybe I think it's more devastating than Bambi's mom getting shot because that you don't even really see. This you see it getting ripped and you see her face.
You're right there in that violent scene. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's tough.
Those stepsisters, they are rotten to the core. It makes you just hate them even more, And I can hear what you're saying. Emotionally, it's really sad and so beautifully conveyed in the animation because, again, as you're saying, you were just right there. I love how they just do those close-ups.
Oh,
and that it's devastating.
Yeah,
and then they go off and the stepmother doesn't even, she's like, well, good night or whatever she says. I mean, what a jerk she is. She doesn't even stop the girl, or she kind of does, but it's token, right? It's after the fact, they've already destroyed her dress and there's no way she could go to the ball. And Cinderella runs off, in that black room.
Oh, just that, and one of my, I posted a GIF of that on Twitter when I was watching, and one of my friends was like, I can't even watch that scene. I can't deal with it. I'm like, it's really that emotional, and you see her crying on the bench, and she's given up.
She's devastated.
She's given up. This hopeful, positive character has finally reached her limit, and who can relate to that? Who can relate to having that moment where you're just I I can't take it anymore. I'm
Yeah.
done, you know, like, and you just hope that at that moment that you have somebody who's there to help you. And so
and after the kind of day she had too, I mean, bless her heart, you know,
and
waiting
so,
all day.
Yeah. Working so hard. She gets this little bit of hope and then it's just torn apart. And I love, so the fairy godmother comes and you have Verna Felton, who is a delight.
Yeah, and I've always loved how the fairy godmother appears to her. How she shows up and Cinderella's crying in her lap. You know,
me too.
And I just think that was such a nice touch because she doesn't come in from afar. You know, she just like shows up and she's right there to comfort her.
Yeah, I agree.
I thought that was a really wonderful artistic choice.
And I love when she says, "Nonsense, child. If you had lost all faith, I wouldn't be here." I love that.
Yeah.
It's so good.
So good.
And Verna Felton, she was one of the queens of Disney voice acting. She was in this as fairy godmother, of course, but she could do villain or hero. She managed to have that voice because she was the Queen of Hearts. She was Aunt Sarah in Lady and the Tramp.
Yeah, horrible Aunt Sarah.
Yeah, and so anyway, she was one of the elephants in Jungle Book. A lot of different roles, which is really cool.
Really good. Yeah. Such a great voice actress.
So good. And Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo, of course, we get, which is so great.
One of the great songs, you know, again of I think all the Disney movies too. Now, this article Rachel was saying that, you know, this Mindy Johnson article, she got, I don't know if she did the interview with Mark Davis or she read it somewhere, but according to animator Mark Davis, Walt Disney's favorite segment of animation in any of his films was when Cinderella gets her dress in that scene. And
it's certainly up there for me.
Yeah,
for you?
Yeah. You know, I think it's true. I think it's terrific.
Yeah.
I think
it's hard to rank things. They're all so good.
But it really is great because, again, the payoff is so good because Cinderella, the whole song, she's like, you know, I'm here. You know, she's taking care of all of it.
Yeah.
And the payoff is really great. But I was happy to know that was the scene that really resonated with Walt Disney too.
Yeah.
It's again, it's.
I know the beginning of Lady and the Tramp is one of his favorites.
Yeah.
Was one of which Lady and the Tramp, I think, was one of his favorite movies that he ever did.
Yeah. It's so hard
which should not be a surprise if anyone's been to Disneyland. That Lady and the Tramp was his favorite movie.
Yeah. Exactly.
But yeah, it's a magical scene. It pays off so much because it had been so devastating and to see her in that dress and yeah, I love it too. It's definitely up there for me for sure. And the one thing that we kind of skipped over that I do think there's a little bit too much of the King and the Duke. All this sort of shenanigans of him like yelling and screaming like a mad person, and that could have been reduced, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I can understand where you're coming from. Again, looking at it on this viewing, but also previous movies, for some reason I strangely like it. I think part of it too is the quote unquote physical comedy that they put into it because I mean the King is insane, you know.
He's a crazy person.
But it's just so fun. I just think how they animate him and on the different props that he's doing and like, you know, isn't the very first thing you opening up and he's just violently throwing things at the Duke. Axe to, you know, stuff off his desk or whatever. And
this man wants
he's crazy, but
this man wants grandchildren, like something fierce. Like he's
it's a desperate yeah. He's a desperate man. Desperate time call for desperate man, right?
And I didn't
But
realize that
they
the
do go
Duke
on.
and
They
the
do go
King had the same vocal guy, Louis Van Roden. I didn't know that. Same vocalist.
Well,
At least that's what
it's
it says
really
on
fun.
here.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and June Foray, she did Lucifer.
She's Lucifer
I
in one
love
of
June
her
Foray.
first, if not her first, film role,
Yeah.
which is really cool.
Oh, was
Yeah.
it first? I didn't know that.
I think it's one of her first. I helped put together an obituary for her, on and I'll have to look. I'm not sure if it was her first, but it definitely was
One
one
of
her
the
early.
first, yeah. So the only defense I will have for the King and the Duke's scenes is that because we don't even really have a name for our prince, it's just Prince Charming, and he doesn't really have a whole lot of dialogue, I think that we kind of need some of those scenes to kind of give the prince some character. Like we find out from the King that we find out that he's resistant to get married, that he's an idealist, that we just find out some things about the prince. So it's certainly not a deal breaker or anything, but it probably could have been a little shorter.
Yeah.
If I was nitpicking.
I hear you. I think too, I just am so wowed with how they animated the interior of the castle. I love that.
Yeah.
It's still in that same first scene where the King is throwing all that stuff at the Duke, and then he's talking about just all those things that you mentioned about the prince, and he's showing those different portraits, that are on the walls.
Yeah.
I love the perspective, and I just love looking at these paintings. I don't know what it is. I love it when they put paintings inside an animated film for some reason. I'm kind of possessed about it. But,
and he has got to have like the largest bed ever. Disney. That is
that scene when they're bouncing on the bed too. I don't know. It's so silly, and it's so fun because they're just using all the wonderful things that animation can do. That they're all that go on stretch, and they're defying gravity in all sorts of ways, and it's so fun.
Yeah.
To me, yeah.
So no, and so they decide to throw the ball. They get the invitation to the ball. And then we have our scene with the fairy godmother, and she gets whisked away, but she has to be home by midnight. The classic story, and she's in her beautiful dress. And as soon as the prince sees her, of course first he's yawning
because he's meeting the stepsisters.
Yeah, like,
and then they're in the background. I mean, here are these obnoxious, and as we find, no really cruel women, and there's Cinderella, and then just kind of looking around, and it's a wonderful way I thought how that scene was framed and put together.
Yeah,
yeah,
and then we have So This Is Love. And of course, like it's inherent in the nature of Cinderella that they fall in love at first sight. That's just part of the story. What are you going to do?
Have they even said hello? They're like in love.
Yeah, I mean that's just part. They have to fall in love by midnight, or otherwise the story makes no sense.
Yeah. So they just fall in love. At first glance.
Right, and that's fine, I think. But it is a beautiful song, and the animation in that sequence where they're dancing and then they're out in the courtyard or whatever.
Yeah,
it's like the whole thing had like crystals poured over it. It's so pretty.
Yeah, it is. It's so beautiful. And again, Mary Blair.
Yeah.
You see some of that concept art where, just the starry sky too, and it's beautifully said, Rachel. It was just crystals everywhere, and it looks so natural, so surreal and wonderful. It's just this great fantasy with this really terrific song. It's a duet. Cinderella starts singing, and the prince chimes in.
Yeah,
and it's terrific. It's so great. And
it still holds up, I think, as one of the better Disney love songs.
Oh, absolutely. I'm with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the miracle. Yeah. So yeah, and then of course she has to leave, and
The
and then
clock
leaves.
starts. The clock starts striking
Yeah,
midnight,
yeah.
and she's got to. Yeah,
And she's got a race,
she's under. Yeah, it's just pressure.
and I
Which
love.
and that's a great sequence too.
Oh,
As she's
so
running
good.
out of the castle, it's so well done.
Yeah,
I was really noticing again, or admiring. Really, I noticed it before, but admiring
yeah,
the editing of that. How they keep going back to the clock, and and all of the commotion that's going on with her trying to leave, and then the
yeah,
dude trying to find out who she is, and not to mention the prince trying to get her name and
yeah.
everything.
And
Yeah,
I love when she's just sitting on the road and there's like the pieces of the pumpkin or whatever, and just her like expression of like it'll always be in my dreams, and
yeah,
that she just needed that one night and that was it, and it's just
and
so
it's
great.
gratitude. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, again, she's what a great expression of gratitude she
yeah,
gives in that she sees that she's got the one glass slipper left as kind of like, I just feel like it's like her gift, right?
right.
A reminder from the fairy godmother, and she has that wonderful smile on her face, and she just looks up at the heavens and says thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I know.
and
It's so
it's so
good.
wonderful. Yeah,
Yeah. And so, yeah, so we know, of course, then you have uh, the the king finds out that about the glass slipper, and that the prince will marry anybody who fits into the slipper. Of course, it's very small. She's a very dainty feet, and so he says, "Okay, I'm going to take him up on that." He's basically going to make his son marry whoever fits the slipper, no matter what, which is hilarious.
I know
And so they go
it
around,
is.
and you see uh, you have this very chilling scene where Cinderella she had been humming and being sort of forgetful of things, and so Lady Tremaine starts to kind of wonder, and you see this scene of Cinderella sitting at her vanity or whatever, and Lady Tremaine comes and locks the door, and it's pretty chilling scene.
Locks her
No, no.
in her tower. Oh, it's very chilling because again, Lady Tremaine figures it out that she's the girl
Yeah,
she was the mystery girl, and she wasn't having it.
yeah.
So
And she's got that key in her pocket, and it kind of thuds, thuds, thuds. And so then we have Jack and Gus
yeah,
Gus.
the animals come to the rescue. And I gotta tell you, that scene with Jack and Gus Gus as they're trying to get the key to Cinderella.
Oh,
Again, it's one of those that's maybe some people think, I don't know. I can't say I've heard any complaining about it, but I think it's just the best storytelling. It is
yeah,
so. They made something that could have been kind of a quick wrap up and turn it into an incredibly exciting climactic scene in the film.
yeah. Oh, yeah, I agree. And I think that it's just so tense, and you see Gus, and he's like clobbered and he's looking up at that's a great animation too, when you see the stairs, and it's like, almost reminds me
I
of
know,
like,
like it's vertigo.
yeah, it does. It kind of does feel like vertigo. And poor Gus. And then they get all the way up there, and you hear just such great voice acting in when Lucifer's, she's like, go get Bruno, get Bruno.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna freak out.
I know. I was like, is she going to be able to get out of there? What's going to happen?
Yeah.
I mean, you know the outcome of the fairy tale, but yeah, they still make it's so exciting. I just thought
Yeah.
it was such good. It's such good storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, I remember as a kid just being completely in just this, and Sleeping Beauty were definitely like my favorite movies for sure, because Little Mermaid didn't come out until I was 8, and so yeah, Cinderella and because some of the other ones were a little too scary for me, like Pinocchio was definitely too scary for me as a little kid. I mean, I remember seeing.
Yeah.
And even
Pinocchio's
Snow White's
dark.
pretty scary. Although I remember feeling like super brave.
Snow White's got
I was super.
Yes.
I thought I was super brave about Sleeping Beauty. I remember thinking like, oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I loved all the Disney movies. But I remember especially loving Sleeping Beauty and especially loving Cinderella as a little girl. because they were just so magical. And it is tense, and you do care because you care about this character and all that she's had to go through.
You care. Yeah, you really care. You really want this to happen. And again, you know it's going to happen, but they make it so tense.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
Really I've always
really
just loved fairy tales my whole life. I've never been big into fantasy, like things like Lord of the Rings, and I now I appreciate it as an adult, but as a kid, I was not into that kind of fantasy type books and movies and stuff. But fairy tales I always liked. Yeah. I always liked fairy tales. I think it's because they always end with a happy ending, and I don't know, I just always liked them. And yeah, and so she's able to get free, and just as the Duke is leaving, she says, "Wait, what about me?" It's so good. And don't I get to try it on? I think is what she says, or something like that.
The wicked stepmother. Yeah, and the wicked stepmother in her one final act of evil. She trips the Duke's little helper there, who's got the shoe on a pillow, and it breaks into 1,000 pieces. And then the great reveal. That Cinderella has the other sliver. And I love how they animated the wicked stepmother too. They give her this look of just kind of shouts. Yeah. It's so great because it's just
really good.
Take that, you horrible.
Yeah. It's so good.
The good people are gonna win this time, and it's so satisfying. Yeah,
and then you get your final scene with the prince and Cinderella coming out in the wedding. I love her wedding dress.
The wedding.
Gorgeous.
And those bells. I mean, again, the music's so great. You know how they incorporate the bells into that final theme. And yeah, she looks so so pretty. And she's back in the great coach again. A different one, but still this great coach. And
yeah,
the mice are there. After. Yeah.
And it was interesting because there was an article about how Disney weddings, and I was like, there really aren't, because this person was making the claim that all Disney movies end with a wedding. I'm like, actually not. There's not that many that end with a wedding. You have Robin Hood, Cinderella, you have Little Mermaid, Princess and the Frog. So some of the princess ones have it, but most of them it's actually they just together or whatever. They don't actually have a wedding and a wedding dress.
Right. This one is,
Tangled doesn't. It's not till Tangled Ever After. And so anyway, it's just kind of fun. It's just fun. And it's just, I just love it. I love this movie. I think it's definitely in my my top 5 Disney movies.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I just think Cinderella is almost like the benchmark of the Disney animated feature. I think so too. It is so good. And people say, "Oh, it's just Princess." We're like, as we said, look deeper. It's really a terrific. It's an entertaining film. It teaches good things. To kids. It's a fairy tale, and and there's a happy ending. And what's not to like? What's not to like about that? There was this. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying it has beautiful animation and beautiful songs. So
yeah, the songs are so great. And Mindy Johnson had this great quote, Rachel. She's saying that much like his heroine, Cinderella, Walt Disney and his team of artists overcame challenging circumstances to secure the future of the Walt Disney Studios with the success of Cinderella. And in the grand tradition of the fairy tales, they ensured that the art form of animation also continued happily ever after. And I like that a lot too, because again, the film was so important as we've discussed, not only to the history of of the studio, but again, it just continues on as its own in just such a wonderful way. It's a really wonderful film and a great piece of art.
Yeah, I mean because they were animation had kind of reverted back to shorts and I mean everything, it would have been very different if it wasn't for Cinderella. So we can all be very grateful for it, and I just love it. It's one of those movies I can put on and just I don't know. It's just so pleasant. It's such a pleasurable experience. I'm not bored. I'm not, I know. I just love
Yeah,
it.
it's like, oh, let's fast forward through this scene.
No.
It's like, no, it's like, awesome. It's this scene.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
for me, it's like I'd give it a 10 out of 10. To me, it's perfect score.
Yeah, I do too. I'd give it a 10. I think it's a perfect film.
Yeah. So we're really excited to continue this series every month, and we decided instead of picking a name randomly next month, and it's kind of perfect for Valentine's because I think the most romantic Disney movie, most Valentine-y Disney movie
It's a romantic one.
is Lady and the Tramp, even though it's about dogs. And
it's such a good one.
And so
I decided.
Yeah. So the reason why we thought about doing Lady and the Tramp in February is because they're releasing Diamond Edition.
Yeah, it's like
Blu-ray.
that Walt Disney signature line, that they've got.
Yeah.
With and again, whatever that means, it's just going to be on digital and Blu-ray, and yay, hooray! You know what I mean? It's like, yes, please.
Yeah, with a whole bunch of like special features and stuff.
New special features, and and Disney always, thank goodness they do such a wonderful job with these Blu-ray releases. I just feel like they always do such a great transfer of the film.
Yeah.
And they're pristine and just terrific. And it's wonderful too that they're making them available on digital HD platforms too. So
it'll be so exciting. So,
that'll be fun to do in February.
Because I think that Lady and the Tramp is a movie that I don't know if I think that Lady and the Tramp is a movie that I don't know if all kids really know about it, or they probably know the spaghetti scene, but if they've seen it, do they know about it? And it's just such a sweet, lovely little film.
What a gentle, wonderful movie it is.
Yeah, so I'm excited.
I am too, and I hope that a lot of families will reintroduce it or introduce it to their kids for the first time.
I wish they were releasing it onto the, doing like a Fathom event or something like that. That would be fun.
I would love to see it on the big screen.
I know.
Because it was originally designed to be in CinemaScope.
Mm-hmm.
So just so huge widescreen presentation but again, happy for a really nice transfer, and that they have the correct aspect ratio, and you can at least enjoy the film as it was
intended.
Designed.
Yeah. All right. Well, cool. Thanks so much for talking Cinderella with me. This is so fun. So,
thank you, Rachel. I really appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
I'm excited. It'll take us it'll take us a while to get through them all, but it'll be really fun.
Yeah,
and I'm
take a while.
looking forward to it. And so, where can people find you?
Yes, I'm on Twitter. It's at Stanford Clark, and I also have a movie blog, which is stanfordclark.wordpress.com.
Awesome, great. And we are going to be together again sometime this month talking about obscure animation. So we'll look forward to doing that as well. So thanks again, and you can find me at Smiling LDS Girl on social media and at 54 Disney Reviews on my blog. I have canon reviews on this channel and also on the blog. And so I'll put links to all of that. Check it out. And we'll get together we'll see you in a couple of weeks.